3 spine-chilling true police encounters revealed, haunted cases of sinister and unexplained terror. Jessica hurried through the dimly lit streets of Willow Creek, the light drizzle adding an eerie feel to the night. She could never have imagined that the local police, her supposed protectors, could be the source of her greatest fear. As a single mother working late at the grocery store, the thought of her children, playing innocent and carefree while she toiled, was now haunted by dread. Every shadow felt alive, every whisper of wind unmistakably sinister. She read about police encounters gone wrong. She felt the stir of panic in her gut. Why were the streets so silent tonight? Her thoughts spiraled as she passed 2 officers parked by the roadside. They smiled as she trudged by, their laughter echoing in an unsettling way that sent a chill down her spine. She forced herself to smile back, their eyes gleaming in a way that felt wrong. "Need a ride home, miss?" one officer called out. No, she would not accept. It felt wrong. A gut sensation clung to her like cold sweat, nagging that their smiles concealed more than kindness. Yet when she arrived home, her kids were nestled peacefully in their beds, and she dismissed the feeling as mundane paranoia. She settled into her own restless night, the murmur of her children's whispers drifting through the walls. Her heart raced as she sensed the unease rising. The next evening was different. "Mommy, there's a man in the dark," they whimpered, wide-eyed with fear. Jessica felt the world around her shrink, shadows in the yard suddenly menacing as her heart thundered in her chest. Each night brought new terrors. Whispers exchanged between neighbors grew louder. Dogs bayed at imaginary threats, rattling the still air with their anxious howls. It was as if a dark presence haunted their once peaceful suburb, lurking just beyond sight. Jessica's stomach twisted. She had seen the faces of missing kids plastered around the precinct walls. The dread clawed at her sanity. What if that darkness had come for her own children? Trying to make sense of her fears, Jessica approached the police station. She expected help, a reprieve. Instead, the officers laughed dismissively, their mockery cloaked in a smile. "Just let the kids be kids," one said. The condescension stung like ice. Doubt filled her mind, gnawing at her gut. She wanted to scream, demand to know if they had even heard about the cases, the kids who disappeared from similar streets, albeit under different skies. Desperation surged within her. She quickly found herself standing before the abandoned elementary school, swallowed by rumors and tales of loss from years past. The building loomed ahead, engulfed in darkness, letting out an ominous draw to her inner fears. There was something in that school, something waiting to confront her. As she turned to flee, the instinct burned deep. A figure stood at the entrance, cloaked in shadows. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue." The figure leaned forward, eyes piercing through the midnight air like daggers aimed straight at her heart. That haunting gaze told her everything she needed to know, the very worst of the unimaginable. She was no longer just a worried mother. She would need to confront the looming horror stretching forward, asking if the true danger was closer than she dared to admit. Because in that moment, surrounded by those terrible shadows, she realized, sometimes those who are meant to protect you can become your worst nightmare. How could she keep her children safe when they stood in the presence of darkness that twisted all around them? The figure took a step forward, revealing a tangle of shadows that danced like broken whispers in the night. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribcage, a frantic drum echoing the thoughts screaming in her mind. Was this the dark presence haunting her life? Was this the end of her fragile grasp on sanity? The figure, now illuminated by a stray beam of moonlight, became clearer. A boy, perhaps no older than 11, with hollow eyes full of despair. "Help me," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper, coated in terror. Jessica's breath hitched. He looked familiar, like a face she had seen on those want ads, the lost children plastered on telephone poles. Her instincts warned her to run, but something anchored her feet to the ground. Fear and curiosity wrapped tightly around her veins. Where are your parents?" she asked, voice trembling, barely able to comprehend the horror standing before her. The boy just shook his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, eyes darting back toward the shadows shrouding the school. She felt the chill of something creeping behind her, a presence that shouldn't belong in a town like Willow Creek. Suddenly, a screeching laugh exploded from down the street. It was the officers she had seen earlier, standing by their car with a swagger that seemed out of place. They weren't just there to protect. Not anymore. They watched, their eyes fixated on her, grinning as if sharing a secret she wasn't allowed to know. "Hey, is everything all right?" one called out, sarcasm dripping from his tone like venom. Jessica's blood turned to ice. The boy's gaze shot back toward them, panic flashing across his face. "Run!" he whispered urgently. But something in her froze, the weight of the moment crushing her spirit. She felt the boy's small hand grasp hers, and for a second the warmth enveloped her, pulling her toward hope. But then she remembered her children, sleeping innocently at home, oblivious to the monsters lurking just beyond their front door. She yanked her hand from the boy's grasp, her heart crumbling as she backed away slowly. I can't," she stammered, the choice tasting bitter on her tongue. "I have to get home." With a flick of the wrist, the boy pointed toward the school. "You have to help us, they won't let us go." His voice rose under the weight of urgency, echoed by the laughter of the officers that slithered into the night like a poisonous fog. All at once, dread gripped her. Could it be true? Were these officers involved in something dark? The truth was unbearable, and navigating through the twisted reality felt like drowning. As the boy's eyes widened, a new wave of shadows twisted behind him, too dark, too alive. She could almost feel their clutch on her soul, pulling her back toward the cursed building. She turned and ran, but her heart was split between fear for her children and the burning need to protect this boy, the lost child crying for help. "Wait!" he screamed, but her legs propelled her faster than her conscience allowed. She stumbled homeward, her breaths ragged and shallow, the darkness behind her whispering stories of the lost. Each step felt heavier, their weight dragging her toward the fallacy that she could escape. When she reached her house, her eyes darted back to the street, but he was gone. The chilling laughter echoed once more. Jessica slammed the door shut, locking it tightly. She leaned back against it, heart racing, the implications of her horror unfolding like a nightmare. She had escaped for now, but the night was far from over. The officers wouldn't just disappear, and the shadows, they were still close. Her phone buzzed suddenly, shattering the silence. It was a text from her neighbor. "Did you see them?" A dread she had never imagined washed over her. Next door, she could hear frantic whispers, fear peppering their words, as if they too had seen the danger lurking just beyond the door. What grew silent outside would soon echo through every home in Willow Creek. The clock was ticking, and the shadows were undeniable. What was truly happening in Willow Creek? And was there anyone left who could still fight against the nightmare that was closing in on them all? The phone buzzed again, jarring Jessica from her mounting panic. Another message from her neighbor. I heard the sirens. They were so close. Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "What's happening?" The silence after her message felt suffocating. She glanced out the window, heart in her throat. The street was bathed in an eerie glow from the streetlights, casting shadows that writhed with every breeze. She squinted, straining to see any sign of life, any semblance of normalcy. But the stillness was deafening, the kind that made her instinct scream run. The laughter from before rippled through her mind, sending cold shivers down her spine. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it, but the officers' smug faces loomed there instead. She remembered the child, his wide, terrified eyes that told stories of secrets better left buried. Rushing footsteps echoed from next door, and Jessica instinctively pressed her ear to the wall. Whispers turned into frantic shouts. "We have to leave! We can't stay here!" Adrenaline surged. What if the danger was closer than she thought? The boy's face flashed back into view, a sign of something more, something horrific unfolding in her town. She caught a flicker of movement in the periphery and turned sharply, only to see the shadows near the school shift, almost as if they were coalescing, forming a mass that writhed like angry snakes. Her heartbeat thundered louder than her thoughts. What happened in the school? She turned back towards the front door, the thought of running spilling into her mind. But just then, a heavy knock echoed through her home, making her jump. "Jessica! Open up!" It was her husband's voice, blaring through fear. She tore the door open. "Where are the kids?" he rasped, eyes wide with terror. Instinct propelled him forward, scanning the house, searching for their children. "They're fine, they're upstairs sleeping," she assured him, but dread pooled in her stomach. She could hear muffled cries from next door, a growing cacophony of horror. "Did you see them?" he gasped, backing away toward the window. "The cops! It's not right! They were—" His voice faded as his eyes locked on something outside. She followed his gaze. The officers were now strolling down the street, moving deliberately as if hunting. Each step seemed calculated, sinister. Their laughter drifted in again, echoing off the walls like the final nail in a coffin. "We have to get out," her husband urged, his body tense, shoulders rigid with urgency. "We can't stay here." But she couldn't shake the boy from her mind. "What about the children?" she asked, panic edging in again. "He's right, we have to leave now," her husband insisted, darting to the stairs. In that moment, another cold wave of dread coursed through her. What if they come here? What if they're watching us? The reality of their situation settled in. Outside, one of the officers turned sharply, locking eyes with Jessica through the window. The smile widened on his face, an unsettling grin that sent ice through her veins. A predatory light sparked in his gaze, and she felt the shadows creep closer to their home, a pulse whispering horror in her ear. "Get the kids!" she screamed as panic bubbled inside her throat. They raced up the stairs, but she froze at the top, the boy's words haunting her mind. "They won't let us go." She turned back to the window just in time to see the officer step off the sidewalk. Her heart sank. He was coming. The door suddenly slammed open and Jessica braced, breath catching, as the form of their neighbor spilled into the room, gasping for breath, eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" was all she heard before the shadows surged forward, and the scream that followed filled the house, cutting through the air with sharp clarity. Jessica's mind raced. What could they do? Time was slipping away, and the darkness was closing in. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again, another text. "They're coming for you too." Fear gripped her throat. The nightmare in Willow Creek was far from over. Would they make it out alive, or would they too become another whisper lost in the shadows? Jessica's heart pounded in her chest, the terrors around her suffocating. Her neighbor's scream rang in her ears, a bone-chilling reminder of their very real situation. The shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting, hungry for something to devour. "Jessica, what do we do?" Her husband's voice cut through the haze of fear. He was already halfway down the hall, adrenaline fueling his movements. "Get the kids!" she shrieked, thrusting open the door to her children's room. Time blurred. She rushed in, switching on the light. Two small figures huddled in the bed, pale and frightened. "Mommy!" her daughter whimpered, rubbing her eyes as if waking from a nightmare. "No time for that. We have to go now." Jessica's voice held a frantic edge, feeling the rising tide of terror. She pulled her kids from the bed, clutching their small hands as they blinked up at her. Her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up in stark contrast to the dimness surrounding her. Another text. "They're already inside. Run!" Her breath caught. "No, no, no." "Stay close," she commanded, ushering her children down the stairs with urgent whispers. Her husband was waiting at the bottom, shifting anxiously, scanning each corner as they moved. The noise outside thickened, a cacophony of sirens and distant laughter, taunting, leering. They reached the door. With every second that ticked by, the sense of unease swelled. "What if they've blocked our way?" Jessica whispered. "Maybe we can use the back door," her husband suggested, glancing nervously at the windows, their strange reflections twisting the darkness into even more sinister forms. "Okay, hurry," she replied, the urgency propelling her. Just then, a loud crash echoed from outside, shattering the fragile calm. The sound rattled through her bones. "Mommy!" her daughter squeaked, looking up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Keep moving," Jessica urged, strong voice cutting through fear. They reached the kitchen, breathless now, hearts racing in synchrony. Her husband swung open the back door, and the night air chilled them. A sudden realization washing over. "Wait! Listen!" He gestured toward the oppressive silence outside. The laughter had stopped. It was the kind of silence that screamed something was very wrong, more menacing than the storm brewing just beyond their reach. "What's happening?" Jessica's voice quivered, fear wrapping around her throat. The shadows at the edges of her vision pulsed, as if waiting for an invitation to act. A distant cry broke the stillness, echoing from next door. The neighbor's voice, frantic and desperate. Then the darkness seemed to ripple outward, shadows stretching, swelling. "We have to move, now," her husband insisted again, pulling her and the children along as they moved into the yard. They stepped out onto the soft grass, and Jessica was hyper-aware of every breath, the air heavy and damp. It felt thick, almost suffocating. Silence pressed against her. Just then, the growl of laughter returned, a sound that clawed at her sanity. A group of figures emerged from the darkness, their uniformed shapes blending with the night like phantoms. Her husband turned to her, eyes wide. "Run!" he yelled, bolting for the street. But Jessica hesitated, glancing back toward the house. It felt like something was trapped inside, a presence urging her to stay close. "The kids!" she cried, yanking them towards her. They fled down the driveway, adrenaline coursing through her as she glanced back at the figures, the officers, with their inhuman smiles, eyes glinting like polished stones. Out at the street, their neighbor's front yard stood vacant, an empty promise of safety. Her husband was already scanning for somewhere to hide. "To the trees!" he shouted, pointing toward the line of looming oaks at the edge of the park. Nodding, they stumbled toward them, breath hitching and limbs on fire. But with every step she took, Jessica felt the shadows lurking, as if the trees themselves were eyes watching, waiting to reveal a truth she wasn't ready for. Just then, a low voice rasped from the darkness. "You can't escape." Jessica froze, pure horror washing over her. Something was coming, something she might not survive. "Go!" her husband urged again, yanking her forward. But panic clawed at her chest, an icy grip. They were cornered, and the trees seemed to close in around them, the laughter rising once more like a haunting refrain. Her heart sank. "What do we do?" she whispered, feeling time slip away like the shadows creeping toward them. But the darkness thickened, blocking out hope. "You'll find out soon enough," the voice called again. With renewed urgency, Jessica grabbed her children and sprinted, but as they dove deeper into the trees, the laughter echoed ominously, reminding her of just how close everything was to unraveling. And just before they disappeared into the cover of leaves, the last thing she heard was a low murmur. "No one is coming for you. No one ever will." Her breath froze. Would they make it out alive, or were they destined to become just another tale lost in the night? Jessica plunged into the trees, frantically pulling her children behind her. Each step was a desperate dash against the icy grip of the darkness that encircled them, every rustle of leaves sounding like whispers of doom. "Mommy, I'm scared!" her son cried, his little fingers trembling in her grasp. "Hold on tight!" Jessica urged, her voice cracking under the strain. They weaved through the twisted trunks, branches clawing at their clothes, as if the very forest conspired against them. A thrill of dread settled in her stomach, the laughter still echoing, now layered with something more sinister, a chant, a rhythm. "No one is coming for you." It slithered through the air, wrapping around her, squeezing her heart tighter. Ahead, she glimpsed movement. Shadows flickered like candle flames, darting among the trees. "There!" her husband shouted, breaking through a thicket. He gestured toward a slight clearing, a hint of relief washing over his face. "Over there!" Hope surged, but it was short-lived. They stumbled into the clearing, breathless, but it was empty, surrounded by looming darkness, now darker than before. The laughter crescendoed, morphing into a chorus of disembodied voices, swirling around them. "Jessica, move!" her husband yelled, pulling her back to the right. They rushed toward a thick grove of underbrush, crouching down, hearts jackhammering against their ribs. "What if they find us?" Jessica's whisper trembled, half desperate, half pleading. "They won't, they can't. Just don't make a sound." But silence now felt like a lie. The night had become alive, shadows shifting as if something were searching for them, something hungry. Then a shriek tore through the air, a piercing wail that sent a jolt through Jessica's spine. It was her neighbor's voice, echoing from within the forest, a warning, a plea. "Help, please!" Jessica instinctively moved to rise. "No!" her husband hissed, forcing her back down. "We have to stay here!" Torn between instinct and logic, Jessica felt her heart race again. They couldn't leave her neighbor. They had to help. Yet fear clawed at her gut, screaming that moving could mean death. "Mommy!" her daughter whimpered, clinging to her side. "Shh!" Jessica pressed her finger to her lips, desperation coursing through her. But the urge to protect her neighbor felt like a thread fraying at the edges. An unseen beast lurked in the shadows, and their sanctuary was rapidly dwindling. The gleam of a flash of light pierced through the darkness, the glimmers of flashlights swaying and bobbing, signals of authority, or worse, nightmares. The laughter escalated, morphing into hissing whispers that spoke her name, Jessica. The hairs on her arms stood upright. They were close, closing in. She jerked abruptly, suddenly aware of a foul stench wafting through the clearing. It was the smell of decay and something else, something metallic. "Hold your breath," she ordered, her heart racing as a figure materialized at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, cloaked in shadows, the light bouncing off its terrifyingly empty eyes. "Run!" her husband urged. It was now a command. As they bolted, dark tendrils seemed to reach out from the trees, stretching ominously. Panic surged within her like fire. "Don't look back!" he shouted, but she could feel it, a chilling sensation that they were being followed. In the distant shadows, she could see forms emerging, distorted, jerky figures dancing in the starlight, a grotesque mimicry of humanity. Their faces contorted in impossible grins, filled with malice. "Mommy, I can't!" her son gasped, stumbling. Jessica turned just in time to see one of the figures lurch toward him, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth opening in a silent scream. "No!" she screamed, desperation pouring out of her. Her heart felt like it would shatter as she grabbed her son and thrust him forward, urging him to keep going. But in that split second, everything froze. Her breath caught as she realized they were not alone. There were more feet pressing upon them, more entities merging from the darkness, surrounding them like a vice. Had they entered a den of horrors? "This way!" her husband cried, elbowing her forward, pulling the kids behind a thick tree, just as screams and laughter collided in a cacophony around them. Then there was silence again, heavy and expectant, as if the forest held its breath. "What is that?" Her daughter's soft voice shattered through the quiet, trembling as the ground beneath them seemed to shiver. "No one is coming." It echoed again, deep and ringingly true. Fear exploded in Jessica's chest, suffusing her with a gut-wrenching certainty that this wasn't just a nightmare. It was a living, breathing horror, threatening to swallow them whole. And just when she thought hope had vanished entirely, a flash of blinding light burst through the trees from the other side, a distant beacon. It flickered for a moment, illuminating their faces. "There, the road!" her husband shouted. But as they started to move toward the light, she realized with dawning horror that the figures were converging again, the giggles and howls vibrating through the very ground they stood on. Frantic now, they pushed toward the light, but Jessica dared to look back one last time. The shadows were everywhere, watching, waiting, and a voice whispered softly, "Too late. It's too late." Her pulse raced louder than the roaring trees, the promise of safety just beyond reach. Would they reach it in time, or were they destined to become part of the night? The answer hung in the air, thicker than dread. They stumbled into the light, breathless, hearts pounding like war drums, but the promise of safety was a cruel illusion. The light flickered ominously, casting long shadows that morphed into grotesque shapes. Jessica's family pressed forward, but dread clawed at her throat, her instincts screaming that they were still not safe. "No, don't let it go out," her husband yelled, a terrible urgency in his voice as the light dimmed for a heartbeat. She turned to see shadows coiling around the edges, whispers growing louder, promising more agony. "Keep moving," she urged, forcing her children to push through the thick underbrush. Each step felt heavier, as if the very air were trying to pull them back into darkness. The path was narrow, and they squeezed their way through, branches snagging at their clothes like desperate hands. From deeper within the shadows, laughter erupted once more, a sickly, sweet sound that chilled Jessica to the bone. "Mommy, I'm scared." Her daughter's voice trembled as they came to a sudden halt in the path. "Keep quiet," Jessica hissed, turning on her heels, frantic eyes scanning the darkness. The laughter morphed into taunts, echoing in a maddening circle around them. It was a game to them, and they were the prey. "Look, up there!" her son pointed, and Jessica followed his gaze to a collapsed tree, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. Just beyond it was an open area, more light spilling down from the sky. They would have to make a run for it. "On three," her husband whispered, steadiness battling his own terror. "1, 2, 3. The three of them bolted, hearts racing as they sprinted toward the faint light. But the shadows became restless, their whispers clicking together in a rhythmic chant, echoing Jessica's own panic. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. A pair of eyes was watching. "Faster!" her husband shouted, pulling the kids along, but it felt like they were sinking in molasses. Jessica turned her head, and there it was, a figure, tall and twisted, emerging from the darkness. Its skin glistened as if wet, eyes hollow and brimming with unholy hunger. "Do you hear them?" the figure crooned, voice slithering through the air. "They don't want you to leave. They want to play." Jessica froze, fear paralyzing her limbs. She felt as though she stood at the edge of a cliff, an invisible thread pulling her towards an unspeakable fate. "Mom!" her son screamed, jolting her back to reality. The words cut through her fear like a knife, and she surged forward again, pulling her children with her. The light called to them, pulsing now, radiating hope amidst the darkness. But as they reached the clearing, the atmosphere grew thick, the air crackling with tension. Jessica could see now. Figures swarmed the space, dancing, leaping in twisted mockery. Then came the loud clash of a horn. A car! The sound stirred something in the air, a ripple of panic through the crowd of shadows. The unnatural figures shifted, whispering among themselves, their awful grins somehow growing wider. "Jessica, that's it! The road is just through there!" her husband shouted, pointing frantically to the edge of the clearing. "We can make it!" But already the figure with the empty eyes reached closer, limbs stretching like tendrils, fingers lunging towards Jessica's children, blocking their path. Laughter erupted once again, this time mixed with frantic screams, a cacophony of terror. "Run!" Jessica screamed, adrenaline surging through her body as she yanked her children forward. The shadows shrieked in protest, raw hunger spilling from the depths of their twisted forms. Would they reach the road, or would they fall prey to whatever hunted them in the darkness? As they broke through the clearing, Jessica's heart sank at the sound of a bone-chilling howl emanating from behind them. The last thing she saw before an icy grip wrapped around her ankle was the figure standing in the lingering glow, a shadow stretching ominously toward the path. The light flickered and the world began to spin. Would they escape this nightmare? Or was the alluring light simply the other side of darkness waiting to swallow them whole? Jessica's scream pierced the air as she fought against the grip of despair that clutched her ankle. The sound was swallowed by the cacophony behind her. The laughter, the screams, the sinister whispers crashed like waves around them. It felt as though the forest itself pulsated with some dark, malevolent heartbeat. "Mom!" Her son's voice trembled, pulling her back from the brink of paralysis. She saw panic etched on his small face, his eyes wide with fear where innocence should have been. "Don't stop! Don't look back!" she shouted, her voice raw, breaking through the suffocating dread as she strained against the icy sinew wrapped around her. With one desperate jerk, she broke free, stumbling forward, almost losing her balance. The warmth of her husband's hand wrapped around her wrist, propelling them forward into the thin veil of light ahead. The clearing felt different now. Instead of a sanctuary, it morphed into a trap. Figures danced at the edges, moving in grotesque rhythms to the frenzied music of shrieks. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic drumbeat urging her to fight or flee. She couldn't tell any more if the light guided them to safety or if it was merely a beacon drawing them closer to doom. "We have to reach the road," her husband yelled, his voice laced with urgency. He was only a few steps ahead, but it felt like an eternity. She could see the pavement glistening faintly just beyond a thicket of trees. It was so close, yet it felt unreachable. The shadows coalesced, darting closer, their whispers rising to a deafening pitch. "Leave us! Join us!" they crooned, the collective sorrow of their taunts echoing in a chilling chorus. Jessica pushed her children ahead of her, urging them to run faster. "Don't listen, just keep going." But even her words felt hollow, drowned by the sinister sounds swirling around them. Just as they reached the tree line, the laughter changed. No longer a playful sound, but something darker. A horrible cackle that slithered into her ears, stirring the primal fear buried deep within. The figures shifted closer, their forms blurring, distorting in the light like ink in water, consuming everything in a suffocating darkness. She risked a glance back, her heart sinking. The creature was there again, the one with the vacant stare, almost smiling now, a grotesque image of happiness twisted into a mask of horror. It beckoned her, fingers curling and unfurling like a snake, ready to ensnare. "Mom!" cried her daughter, slamming back into the whirlwind of chaos. Jessica clenched her jaw, grinding back the scream bubbling in her throat. They were so close. They burst through the last of the brush and onto the road, but it was not the safety she had hoped for. The asphalt was cracked and lifeless, the trees looming like silent witnesses to their plight. A strange stillness engulfed them, suffocating in its unnatural silence. No cars, no refuge. "Keep moving," her husband urged, but they stood frozen, the light behind them flickering once more as shadows slithered along the pavement, creeping closer. Tension warped the air, binding them to the spot, unable to breathe, unable to think. Then something broke the silence. The car horn again, a blaring confusion that sent echoes ringing in the back of her mind. "Jessica!" her husband barked, voice rising in panic as he pointed. In the distance, headlights pierced the gloom, but they were not shining a path to salvation. The light swung wildly, illuminating a shift in the shadows that seemed to gather rather than disperse. "Run!" Jessica screamed, the world blurring around them as they fled toward the light, the sound of the horn guiding them. But it didn't matter. The light dimmed, flickering again, and with it, hope faded. As they sprinted towards what looked like a vehicle, the power of the gathering shadows surged, rushing with silken tendrils, enveloping them in a viscous wave of darkness. Would they reach the salvation at the end of the road, or were they already ensnared forever within the grasp of terror? The last glimpse they got of the world behind them vanished as the shadows swallowed their cries. A suffocating silence fell, and the road buzzed ominously, just as a terrifying whisper echoed back, "You will never leave." The darkness pressed in around Jessica, thick and suffocating, as if it aimed to consume them whole. She could barely breathe, each inhalation sharper and more labored than the last, the fear twisting in her gut like a knife. The sound of the horn faded into a distant echo, leaving only the silence, a heavy, unsettling quiet that rang in her ears, amplifying the pounding of her heart. "Don't stop!" her husband shouted again, but his voice felt distant, swallowed by the oppressive blackness. She felt her children pull at her shirt, confusion and fear mixing in their small faces, their tiny hands trembling. With every step, shadows writhed at the corners of her vision. The grotesque figures from moments ago melded into the darkness, swirling shapes teasing her perception. She pinched her eyes shut and ran faster, as if denying their presence could ease the grip of terror on her mind. Then out of the stillness, a rustling broke the silence, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. It was close, too close. Panic surged in a rush, sending her spiraling toward the shadows, adrenaline propelling her forward. "Mom!" her daughter whimpered, pressing against Jessica's hip as a desperate sob escaped her lips. The weight of dread settled deeper in Jessica's chest, an unshakable weight. They stumbled forward, the ground uneven and rough beneath their feet, forcing them to skirt the edges of the bleak emptiness. Flickering lights lingered on the horizon, but they flickered with a malevolence that left Jessica questioning if they were real or a cruel illusion. "Is it a trap?" Her husband's voice quavered, and as if in response a low growl emanated from the shadows, chilling her to the bone. It wasn't an animal, not any creature she recognized. It was a sound woven from the very fabric of horror, primal in its rawness. "Keep going," she urged, tearing her children along as they moved in a frantic rush. Their feet pounded the pavement, mingling with the distant whispers just beyond the veil. "We have to make it." The darkness surged and receded like waves, taunting them, whispering secrets in an ancient language that curled around their minds. The words felt ominous, filling the air with dread. "No escape. No escape." Her husband glanced over his shoulder, the fear skirting across his face, reflecting all too well what she too felt. "Jessica, what if—" No, what-ifs! Focus!" she shouted, forcing them to keep their eyes ahead. The figures loomed larger, shifting in disjointed motions, as if they played a macabre game of chase. Just then, a sudden burst of light sparked several yards ahead, bathing the road in sickly, fluorescent brilliance. Jessica squinted against the glare, straining to make sense of the scene that unfolded. The vehicle standing there was an old police cruiser, glinting like a siren in the night, but everything felt so wrong. "Help us!" she screamed, launching forward with her family. But as they approached, the engine roared to life with a sound so hollow, so mechanic, it sent a shiver racing down her spine. The years of handling law and order morphed into something sinister, unwanted. The doors swung open on their own, revealing a vacant interior swathed in shadows, the seats just beyond the reach of light. It looked inviting yet void, and a thick scent of something rancid wafted out, metallic and damp. It clawed at her senses. "Jessica!" Her husband's voice trembled. "We can't!" But it was too late. They stood on the precipice of a decision, an invitation to the unknown. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the dark, racing toward them. Its form twisted and undulated like a nightmare incarnate. Jessica felt frozen in place, terror locking her limbs as the monstrosity erupted into the light. In an instant, the air snapped cold, and the figure gripped her children, eyes blackened and burning brighter than the cruel moon above. "Join us!" it hissed, a voice like gravel washing over broken glass, leaving her family caught in its terrible gaze. The shadows surged around them, closing in tight, leaving her breath hitching in her throat as despair crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Mom!" they screamed together, the sound shattering the silence. Jessica's mind reeled as she faced the grotesque creature, a deep terror clawing at her sanity. She could see the flashes of hope extinguished in her children's eyes, stolen away as fear wrapped its icy fingers around them. "Run!" she finally screamed. They had to escape, had to fight against this terror threatening to bind them forever in this nightmarish existence. The shadows thickened, the car weaving back into the swirling dark. Desperation fueled her, and she lunged forward, determined to break free from their grasp, to fight for her children. But was any of this a choice, or had they already stepped onto a path with no return? The darkness deepened as they fled, but would there be an end? Jessica didn't know, but she had to find out. For the shadows were all too willing to claim them, waiting with whispers that seemed to chant their fate. "You will never leave. You will become one of us." Jessica's heart thundered, a frantic echo against the surrounding silence. She clutched her children tighter, their small bodies trembling against her as if they sensed the oppressive dread suffocating the night. With each desperate stride, the creature's presence clawed at her back, the air thick with the stench of decay, mingling with fear. "Mom!" Her son's voice was a panicked plea, dragging her further from the present, deeper into the glimmering pool of terror. Jessica forced herself to look ahead. The police cruiser loomed against the darkness, its flickering lights creating an eerie dance, a vicious joke on her fraying psyche. They hurtled toward the car like moths to a flame, but with every step the feeling of safety ebbed away. The growls grew louder, reverberating like a warped soundtrack played backward, each note taunting her. Would they be engulfed by those nightmarish shadows? "Get inside!" she shouted, the urgency ripping at her throat as she flung open the cruiser door. It swung wide with a creak, and she caught a glimpse of dull brown stains etching their path down the seats. Her stomach churned, but there was no time to falter. Her children scrambled inside, their tiny legs unsteady against the tissue-thin seats. Jessica jumped in after them, slamming the door behind her. It felt like sealing a coffin, the darkness pulsing outside, eager to claim them. The engine revved, but the sound was a sickly purr, spitting to life as if the vehicle were some living thing, hungry and wild. "Mom, what's happening?" her daughter asked, eyes wide, glistening with tears. "I don't know, but we need to go," she gasped, her fingers shaking against the wheel. She fumbled with the ignition, praying for the engine to respond. The purring grew louder, drowning out her children's whimpers. But before she could turn the key, the window shattered, a shadowy arm thrust through the glass, sinewy fingers twisting and curling like black smoke, clawing for something solid. Jessica recoiled, instinctively covering her kids with her body. Time slowed. The arm writhed, searching, reaching. "Drive!" her husband roared, voice straining as the horror unfurled behind them. She twisted the key, and the engine responded with a reluctant cough before roaring to life, a feeble cry against the unfathomable night. The car jerked forward, tires screeching against the asphalt as she slammed on the gas. They lurched ahead, a blinding fear propelling her, but her heart sank as the growls intensified, filling the air with a thrumming dread. The shadows rushed closer, their twisted forms elongating and stretching, trailing like sinister smoke. "Don't look back," she whispered, pleading with her family even as she couldn't follow her own advice. But the pull was too strong. She stole a look over her shoulder, and dread snatched the breath from her lungs. Figures loomed, dark shapes that darted like shadows in the periphery of her vision. They flickered just out of reach, clawing at her sanity, jaws opening, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "Mom!" The terror in her son's voice vibrated against her skull. "They're following us." "No!" she rasped, fear igniting a cold sweat along her spine. "Hold on!" The cruiser swerved wildly as she fought to keep control, every lurch sending a fresh wave of terror crashing into her heart. Desperation clawed at her throat. Just ahead, the road forked, and the path split into two, one leading into deeper darkness, the other toward a flickering light. "Where do we go?" her husband cried, panic lacing his voice. "Right!" she yelled without thinking, praying it was the right choice, knowing they were surrounded by evil that hungered for them. As she veered sharply to the right, the lights loomed closer, bathing the world in a sickly glow. But even as hope blossomed, it felt like a mirage, an ethereal light that twisted reality, promising salvation while hiding the truth. But just as they approached, she caught a fleeting glimpse of figures standing motionless under the light, their faces obscured. Yet she could sense their smiles, joy mingling with malice. Her grip tightened on the wheel. Fear clawed at her insides, screaming for her to turn, to flee from the truth waiting ahead. But could she escape the shadows without knowing their secrets? The oppressive weight of uncertainty hung over her, and as the figures stepped forward, her heartbeat quickened, and the realization settled in. They were not the only ones trying to escape the night. Jessica stole a glance at her family. Her heart pounded in her ears, a wild thrum of adrenaline and dread. What awaited them in that flickering light? Was it refuge or something worse? The air grew thick, and the shadows twisted around them like a sinister dance. The truth hovered just beyond the edge of her perception, and the question loomed large. Would they find salvation, or were they merely stepping deeper into the dark? The car roared ahead, tires screeching against the cracked pavement, but Jessica could feel the shadows closing in. It was as if they were chasing her, whispering taunts that clawed at her mind. "You can't escape. Join us." She jolted, heart racing, focusing on the light ahead, hoping against hope that it would be their salvation. "There's still time," she urged, grip tightening on the wheel. Her husband shifted beside her, constantly looking back, eyes wide with dread. "Mom, what if they catch us?" Her son whimpered from the back seat, emotions raw and shaken. "Shh! Stay quiet. Just hold on," Jessica pleaded, panic surging. With newfound determination, she pressed the accelerator, racing towards the flickering light that promised something she so desperately needed: safety. As they approached, the figures standing under the lamplight grew clearer. They looked eerily familiar, their faces twisted into distorted grins. "Help is here!" they beckoned, voices harmonizing in taunting allure. "Join us! We can protect you!" And in that moment, Jessica's heart sank. The very air felt charged, wrapping around them like a noose, squeezing tighter as if daring her to proceed. They were not the saviors she hoped for, but rather something darker, beckoning her family toward the edge of despair. "Turn back, Jess!" her husband shouted, but it was too late. The path was now choked with shadowy forms surging from the night, pulling and clawing at the car as she veered off course. "No!" She swerved to the left onto a broken dirt road, desperate to escape the horrors she felt were closing in. "We're getting out of here!" The engine sputtered, but roared back to life, carrying them away from the taunts that echoed behind them. Yet the shadows pursued, thin tendrils snaking around the tires like vines gripping a tree. With frantic breath, Jessica looked towards her children, who were trembling, fear etched in their faces. "Mommy, we're going to be okay," her daughter whimpered, clutching her brother's arm. "Of course, sweetie. Just hold on tight. We can do this," she reassured them, though her own heart drummed against her ribs in a wild rhythm, fear, doubt, and determination all battling for dominance. In the distance, a figure emerged, an officer standing in the path with an unsettling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She swerved, heart racing, and rushed past him, but the deep longing in his gaze made the bile rise in her throat. They had conned herself into trusting the very beings she feared. They hit a bump, and the car jolted violently, sending their hearts racing higher. "What if they follow us?" her son cried, raw terror seeping into his voice. "They won't. Just keep watching the road. Trust me," Jessica shouted, determination roaring ahead of her fear. But even as she dashed further into the dark, uncertainty loomed heavier. The headlights flickered intermittently, battling against the predatory black that closed in on all sides. Suddenly, a shadow leapt from the forest beside them, and she swerved again, glancing toward her husband, whose expression screamed caution. "Jessica!" he called, grabbing the door handle as if it might be their only escape route. And then, as they reached the valley, the headlights illuminated a clearing, a long-abandoned warehouse. The red-bricked walls were painted with faded memories, yet the aura felt electric, both a refuge and a trap. "Let's hide," her husband urged, voice taut with anxiety. "We can lose them inside." "No, we can't go in there." Jessica's voice cracked, fear wrapping its icy fingers around her heart. But their options dwindled, and with shadows swirling behind them, she veered the car towards the warehouse, the last crumbling bastion against the horror hunting them. They jerked to a halt, and Jessica instinctively looked outside. "We need to move, now!" She pushed her kids to go first, urging them toward the warehouse's gaping mouth. As they fled, she felt a tug of darkness around her ankles, the whirling shadows resurfacing with a vengeance. But as they crossed the threshold, the shadows faltered, hesitating as if confused by this sacred threshold. Inside, the air was thick with dust, suffocating silence settling heavily. Rotted crates littered the ground, their edges soaked with memory and sorrow. But before she could allow despair to stretch its cold fingers, the whispers grew loud, calling to her, urging her to leave. "Stay together," Jessica commanded, her heart racing as she gathered her children closer, feeling their fear merge with her own. Suddenly glass shattered nearby. Something outside had broken through. The darkness stirred, and screams filled the air. "Mom, what is that?" her daughter cried, holding tight to her brother. With horror, Jessica realized the shadows had found them again. They pulsed against the walls, rushing toward the light that flickered above, eager for the escape only she and her family could provide. Racing together through the maze of crates, Jessica led her family deeper into the warehouse, searching desperately for an exit. Any exit. Each turn felt like a descent into madness, a terrifying labyrinth of whispers that threatened to swallow their very essence. "Where do we go?" Her husband's voice quavered as they entered a wider space, the roof soaring above them and shadows dancing across the walls. "Over there!" She pointed amid the creeping dread, a small rusted door flickering in the shadows. "We have to try." They charged forth, a frantic dash toward hope, but as they reached the door, another figure flared into view, another officer, his face twisted into a chilling smile. "Going somewhere?" he hissed, laughter bubbling just below the surface. "No!" Jessica screamed, pushing her children backward. Within an instant, fear struck her like lightning, flaring up her spine. They were trapped, shadows lurched toward them, their mocking delight slicing through her resolve. "Run!" her husband yelled, and with sheer desperation they sprinted through the only other opening they could find, running headlong into the unknown, leaving the horror behind, the agonizing laughter devolving into a roar. But where were they running? Ahead, a glimmer of light broke through, and time stretched with agonizing slowness as reality tilted once more. They rampaged forth, past crates and pools of darkness, longing for safety yet haunted by what chased them. The darkness behind them shifted, whispering their names as if enticing them to turn back. And just when it seemed they would slip through, the shadows lunged forward with horrifying ferocity, a chilling wall that surged closer, grim fingers ready to pull them back into the night. No, we will not succumb! Jessica's heart surged with an anthem of defiance, echoing the love she held for her children. With one final push, they burst into the fading light, the shadows surging back as a mix of cries and laughter filled the sky. An eternity suspended in brutal grace as Jessica felt a tether snapping. They ran, leaving behind the grasp of darkness, and as the howls grew distant, hope ignited anew. But had they escaped the horror lurking in the night? Or were they merely writing the final chapter of their story, with echoes of the shadows always following, just beyond the gaze of the morning sun? As the light grew brighter, Jessica pulled her children close, whispering, "We made it. We're safe." But deep in her heart, she always felt a tremor of worry, a spectre of darkness lurking, reminding her of all they had lost, all that still waited beyond the edges of the light, an unending promise of shadows that would never truly relent. Jessica would fight, she would protect them at all cost, and as they welcomed the dawn, she knew one thing for certain. They didn't just survive, they had to live, and in this constant struggle against the haunting shadows, they ultimately chose hope, even amidst terror. You need to subscribe now to stay current. Don't miss the chance to journey with us through more chilling stories. Smash the like button now. Your support feeds the algorithm and keeps the darkness at bay. Flood the comments section below with your thoughts and theories about the ending. We want your reactions. And don't wait even one more second to share this story with at least 5 friends who need to hear this conclusion. Stand united against the shadows.